good morning, Soheb, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this online interview on a topic Muslim politics beyond minority representation, understanding caste among Muslim communities in India. I am your host, Zehra, a senior research associate at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. Today, we have an amazing speaker with us, Soheb Niazi, who is an accomplished PhD historian specializing in South Asia, and currently a postdoctorate fellow at the International Institute of Asian Studies, Leiden. Shoaib, thank you for joining us today. Before we dive into the conversation, could you please briefly introduce yourself and your background to our audience?
Okay, thank you, Zehra, for inviting me for this interview. So I'm Soheb Niazi. I'm, as you said, a historian of South Asia, and uh, at the moment, currently, I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the International Institute of Asian Studies in Leiden. But before this, I was associated with the Max Weber Forum for South Asian Studies in New Delhi, and I did my PhD in Berlin at the Freie University in at the Department of History and Culture Studies. Before that, I studied in Delhi in Jamia Millia Islamia and also Jawaharlal Nehru University. So, yeah, that's my short introduction.
Excellent, Suhaib. Let's dive into our topic. So, can you tell about the factors that had recently brought the phenomena of Muslim caste to the forefront of scholarly and media attention in South Asia, especially in India?
Okay, so yeah, we see that there's, of course, a renewed interest in uh, issues of caste among Muslims in the current public and even scholarly debate. I would say this is renewed. Being a historian, I think one can trace phases of interest in Muslim caste uh, much beyond what is going on these days. So, of course, immediately the current discourse is kind of starts with the Mandal Commission report, which came in the 1980s, which led to a lot of caste associations being created in the public domain. Uh, Especially what comes to mind is Ali Anwar's Pasmanda Muslim Mahaz, which was founded in 1998. Uh, However, being a historian who works on the colonial period, I'm also aware that many of these organizations had their precedents in the 1920s. And in that period, um, the introduction of adult franchise in certain institutions, especially local municipal boards uh, and other local bodies where elected members were coming up, uh, that moment as well created several biradri associations, several occupational groups, or as they say, Peshawar biradri groups, who formed associations like the All India Jamiatul Quraysh of butchers and meat traders, but also the Momin Conference of weavers. And then we see that this moment is comes back in the 1980s, as I mentioned, with the creation of new organizations. So almost kind of like after a gap of several decades. Today, there are additional interests behind this renewed interest. One is, of course, in the current in India, the BJP itself has an interest in talking of Pasmanda Muslims. They seem to be talking of these same hierarchies, and it seems the discourse has come back to. Of course, there are many dimensions.
Uh, that's a crucial point, I think. Thank you so much. So, in your research, you have mentioned that discussion about Muslim caste can be practical, shallow, and politically polarized. What are some common misconceptions over simplification you have observed in these discussions, and how does your research aim to address them?
So yes, surprisingly, though, of course, there is renewed interest, and it is very much a discourse in the public sphere currently, there are still very many misconceptions to do with caste among Muslims. Uh, First is, of course, the simple idea that there is no caste among Islam. When I, for instance, began my research in 2016, I was told by many people one idea is that Islam has no caste, and the reasons given for this is that there is no scriptural justification or there is no purity and pollution. Now, of course, this was debated already by several scholars already in the 80s, like Imtiaz Ahmad and others, where there was a series of polemical discussions whether what would be the proper unit of caste among Muslims. I will come to that, but I think beyond the academic discussion, I think in today's time there should be no confusion about whether there is caste among Muslims or not. It could be a politically motivated thing that some people want to deny it, but actually there is enough research by ethnographers, by people who work in the field, uh, especially among waste workers or sanitation workers or people who do dirty work, that there are enough Muslims, there are enough Muslim communities who do this kind of work in India today, and the kind of untouchability, the kind of social stigma and discrimination that they face. So they have a historical legacy, but also the discourse by reformers, Islamic reformers such as Deobandis and Barelvis, such reformist uh, movements who primarily had these distinctions based on genealogy and need. So that's so broadly this distinction of Ashraf and Ajlaf itself. If we historically look at it, it has it comes from the colonial context. But as sociologists in the 1980s and others pointed out, that in terms of being applicable on the ground, these categories are not useful. So one reason is that though we see that the Ashraf category encompasses certain groups who came from abroad, but in today's time, it's very difficult to establish exactly these groups. And apart from that, the Ashraf category, though theoretically it holds Sayyids, Mughals, Pathans, and Sheikhs, as a whole, it's not a category of self-identification per se. Similarly, the category of Ajlaf, which may include a lot of Peshawar Biradris, it's not that each of the Peshawar Biradri claims to be Ajlaf together. It's a very commonsensical thing. Rather, it is the Biradri identity, which becomes the unit of analysis, which should be something that one needs to focus. So, Imtiaz Ahmad points out that the unit of endogamy should be the unit of analysis. So, for instance, the Quraysh Biradri may be marrying within each other, and then the Quraysh Biradri can be looked at as a unit of analysis rather than the Ajlaf as a whole and pitting the Ashraf versus Ajlaf as two broad binary categories. This often, I think, is a problem in the public discourse that you pit these two categories like this. Of course, a better category that a more useful category is the Pasmanda category, which is far more organic. It has come from political movements. It has come from a lot of groups coming together under the banner of Pasmanda, which broadly reflects those who were left behind or those who were marginalized. And that, I think, is a far better category than Ajlaf or Ashraf, which are both derogatory but also not useful in being relevant for categories on the field. The last point about misconceptions and the discourse around caste among Muslims is, of course, that in the current scenario, a lot of these ideas are being used in an Islamophobic narrative. So many people I see on the internet are trying to talk of uh, caste among Islam as a derogatory thing within Islam as a religion, and their intention is rather Islamophobic to make Islam a religion of hierarchy and Islam an inegalitarian religion. Now, the point is not to give verdicts on various religions, whether Sanatan Dharma or Islam can be compared or which religion is better. As a sociologist and as a historian, as a scholar, I think what is more important is to uh, talk of hierarchy, to talk of inequality in any given society, whether Islamic or Hindu. It's not to denigrate one religion over the other, which I think is a problem in today's contemporary public discourse.
You define it so well. Thank you so much, Soheb. So, the next is your work highlights the importance of studying Muslim caste association. Could you please explain why these associations are crucial for understanding the social satisfaction and inequality within Muslim country communities?
Yes, so lately we have been trying to work with several scholars, also in my own work, on various Muslim caste associations. We recently came out with a special issue on Muslim caste associations, the association life of Muslim caste associations for a journal called Contemporary South Asia. And in my own work, I look at several caste associations in the colonial period. I think what is useful, as you asked in your question about studying Muslim caste associations, I think is one that it goes beyond this discourse which I just previously mentioned about whether caste exists among Muslims or not. Now, here we already encounter several Biradri organizations. They are well documented in my own research, but also now research of various young and old scholars who look at contemporary caste associations, which already exists. So there is of course a dearth of enough empirical data on these caste associations, but now that new research is coming up, we see that there are already groups that have a Biradri identity, that are collectivized around this Biradri identity, and they are doing several things related to that. So, one, it allows us to look at caste among Muslims in a more comprehensive way, in a grounded way. Uh, what it further does is it allows us to understand the practice of caste. So, beyond these origin debates of whether caste exists or not, now we have now we can see how several Biradri organizations practice caste. So, it's not just a matter of scriptural evidence or not. So here we see that there are several, these caste associations participate in the political discourse, they participate in public institutions, they have certain social customs, they have certain marriage practices, they may be following endogamy. It is, of course, very varied. Different regions, different regions of South Asia, different communities, different occupational groups have different ways to practice these customs and traditions, but how they enforce social boundaries within their Biradri. And this really enriches our debate and also understanding of Muslim caste. In that sense, I think it is caste associations are very useful to further this subfield of Muslim caste in South Asia.
Yes, so fascinating insight. Thank you for sharing your expertise. So you have discussed two central aspects in your research. One is the perspective of Muslim social mobility beyond limitations, and other is the tension between Muslim minority politics and Muslim caste politics. Could you please provide some examples and insight into how these aspects manifest in the context of Muslim caste association?
Yes, so as you point out, one of the key issues that I deal with in my research is social mobility. I think why this is important is that it of course historically social mobility is something which is is a very relevant phenomena in Muslim caste, but especially amongst occupational groups. But again, what it allows us to understand is the practice of caste itself. Uh, social mobility, understanding social mobility allows us of to understand the extent of social boundaries, the extent of the fluidity of caste or not. So in terms of examples, I look at several groups, several Peshawar biradris or occupational classes. So one is the Quraysh, which formed the All India Jamiat al Quraysh in the 1920s. This was basically a group of people associated with meat, leather, and tanning industries, essentially butchers, but also traders, merchants, and a host of different social actors associated with these trades who uh, who in the 1920s decided to move away from this identity of the Kasab or the Kasai, which was how they were known as, towards an identity of the Quraysh. This involved a set of changes and transformations of social customs and traditions. Similarly, there was the Moment Conference or the All India Jamiatul Ansar, which was a group of weavers who collectivized around the identity of the Ansar or the companion or the Sahabas of the Prophet. Similarly, we had numerous organizations, the Rains or the vegetable sellers, or the Arains as sometimes they call themselves. Uh, there was also the Mirasis who also took up the identity of the Quraysh. And in general, the Quraysh and the Sheikh were two broad identities that were easily available for socially mobile occupational groups. In this context, the scholarly debate has been to understand this phenomena of social mobility as Ashrafization, which is akin to the process of Sanskritization as among Hindu castes. For me, it's not such a simple understanding that is useful. It's not parallelly the same process as Sanskritization. Even Sanskritization is far more complicated. But Ashrafization, as initially understood, was uh, mimicking or imitating the Ashraf or the upper caste Muslims. But actually, if you look at the discourses of several Peshawar biradris and their caste associations, they are not merely imitating the Ashraf. At least this is what I would understand. In the first instance, especially in the 1920s and 30s, what they pick up is genealogy and lineage, because genealogy is a very big discourse uh, in the Urdu public sphere in at least North India, which I am familiar with. So, lineage and descent of either the Prophet's tribe or the Prophet's family, as in the case of the Sayyids, is something that is uh, related to social status. So, we see several Peshawar biradris taking up these kind of lineages, especially in the 1920s, 30s, and this discourse is very hotly debated and very polemical. However, this is not the only thing that these groups are doing. Actually, what they are also putting forth is the stigmatization of their occupational identities. So, butchers, for instance, are seen as very brutal, this kind of brutish community, and there's a lot of stigmatization around their identity. Similarly, we have the weavers who were previously derogatively known as julahas, and there are lots of stereotypes against julahas. So they are also the idea is not just to mimic the ashraf, but it's also to contest and resist these stigmatization of their occupational identities. Beyond contestation and resistance, they are putting forth a new kind of conception of what Islam itself is. It's not just merely resisting, contesting the Ashraf or mimicking them, but also putting forth a new kind of conception. What is this conception? It is primarily to talk of the idea of masawat or equality. So, contrary to the discourse on lineage and nasab, which they partially take up in terms of reconfiguring their identities, what they also emphasize is on the idea of masawat. And masawat then is central to several writings by these occupational groups in the historical literature that they produced, in Qawmi tarikhs or community histories, but also pamphlets, journals, and much of this literature, which I look in my research, where they argue that equality or masawat is the basis of Islam. In addition to masawat, there is an emphasis on pesha or the occupation of these groups. This again is in contrast to lineage or nasab, which is something that they critique, that more important than lineage and nasab is in Islam, where each and every pesha can be practiced equally, and there is no need to have
Okay, so thank you for sharing the wealth of your knowledge. So, can you please share some key examples of from your research that shown the various ways in which Muslim engage with caste through associations such as a political assertion, declassing, social exclusion, and charitably ventures?
Okay, so as I mentioned, many of these caste associations um, enter the public discourse by engaging with uh, political institutions, but not just political institutions, also in general public institutions, trying to build similarly, like previously the Ashraf, institutions of education, charitable endowments, and many such institutions that are part of public life. Uh, in addition to this, there is, of course, there was a discourse of social reform, which was very key in the colonial period, especially in the 1920s and 30s, where a lot of customs and traditions were being reformed. So, for instance, Jamiatul Quraysh or the Jamiatul Ansar often made a call for the erasure of dowry or not following these kind of practices uh, in in marriage. Uh, in addition, many of the contemporary caste associations uh, have uh, have also charitable endowments. So, for instance, in our special issue, we have one paper by charitable endowments of the Rhine community in Uttar Pradesh, Pratapgarh, where often they are engaged with uh, charitable work, not just for their own community, but a far more universal kind of uh, appeal. And in that, in this primarily the idea is to work locally and to do a kind of social work. But
Thank you so much. So, how do caste association amongst Muslim challenges or complement the idea of Muslim unity or homogeneity in the face of diversity with the society, with the community?
so, of course, this is a challenging thing for scholars who work on Muslim caste, and uh, I would say broadly on the heterogeneity of Muslim society in South Asia. This is what I started off my research. This is the kind of central idea of not just my research, but people who work on Muslim societies all over the world, whether in African contexts or in the Arab world or elsewhere, that there is no one homogeneous form of Muslim society, though many would try to claim that. Islam is practiced in multiple ways, in multiple regional contexts. And the idea is to have a fruitful discussion around this. Now, of course, we see that heterogeneous Muslim society that we attempt to look at uh, Muslim caste associations in their multiple regional contexts, in their multiple occupational variations. Uh, in addition to that, we always face this political question about the. I think this is not a new question, but it historically has been put forth in various contexts and various times. So even in the 1920s or even during the partition, Muslim unity is something that is forced to Peshawar biradris and occupational castes to say that uh, this that Muslim unity is more important than these various identities, and it is the need of the hour that we talk of Muslim unity over the diversity within the community. But I think this always has pitfalls because it is only in diversity that we can address certain complicated issues around Muslim identity itself. So even today, we have groups which kind of oppose the discourse on Muslim caste associations on the reason that it weakens Muslim unity. But I wonder if there is an actual weakening of uh, Muslim politics in general uh, if we make room for the diverse nature of Muslim society itself in South Asia. So yeah.
Thank you for increasing our knowledge. So, in your research, you have identified any historical or contemporary cases studies that particularly stand out in the terms of the impact Muslim caste association and social mobility or minority representation.
Okay, yeah, I already mentioned specifically the groups that I look at is one is the All India Jamiatul Quraysh and also the All India Jamiatul Ansar or the Momin Conference and also a similar named organization of the Mirasis in Sialkot in called the All India Jamiatul Quraysh. Uh, what stands out in these groups uh, and in terms of the impact, as you point out in the question, of the political and social relevance of these groups, is that they created a public discourse which has lasted even today. So much of these community histories that they produced in the 1920s and 30s, the discourse on Masawat or Pesha, I find that they have resonances even in the contemporary politics around Pasmanda Muslims since the 1990s. Uh, what it also allowed us is to understand a far more heterogeneous uh, understanding of Muslim society, but also to change certain narratives in the public discourse. I think it challenges this idea that there are certain groups who are hereditally uh, assigned to do certain work. This was very dominant in the feudal structure of not just Muslim society, but in general in South Asia, where we had this Jajmani system of certain groups performing a certain service on labor, and feudal lord or eyes on that labor. These were systematically broken by certain individuals, certain families from these biradris who managed to break these kind of structures through social mobility by occupying themselves in newer professions, in newer jobs, in through higher education. They managed to break these structures And this, of course, is far more common now in contemporary society, where this kind of idea that you are born into an occupation, which was very much common in the feudal structure, continues to do so in many forms, but is something that these caste associations are able to challenge, and will be, I'm hoping, challenge even further this idea that certain groups are hereditarily supposed to do certain work.
Yeah, I agreed with you. So, what are the some of the unique challenges and opportunities that Muslim women may face within the caste association, and how does gender intersect with the dynamics of caste politics among Muslims?
Thank you for this question. I think it's a very important question,
Yes, it is.
something that is yet not fully tackled, even in terms of the scholarship. Of course, women are a very important part of uh, not just uh, Muslim society, but also these Peshawar biradris and groups, but also around the discourse and the politics that is involved. But often we don't find voices of Muslim Pasmanda women or women coming from these groups. We now have some articles in in the media about these ideas, but historically, in terms of research, in terms of our analysis, we find these voices missing. Now, this is just a matter of time and a matter of focus, that we have not been able to do this, but I have enough instances where women were part of these. So the Moment Conference was one very large uh, organization. Of course, most of the leaders that we are familiar with, it's still something, the history writing is still in process. We still have only a few figures that we know about, the main leadership. But if we go into these historical records, we will find a lot of women as well who were associated with these movements. Besides merely identifying certain women, gender is, of course, very much alive. So we can understand the situation of women through focusing on the issue of gender itself. So one is, of course, the whole discourse on genealogy is very patriarchal. It often erases women in the lineage. It is something to think about as to where would women figure if genealogy was not the basis of distinguishing Muslim society and making it all about men. But in uh, in actuality, a lot of these discourses are to do with women. So, for instance, one of the main contested arena, or one of the main kind of issues around Muslim caste, which is very much evident, is the issue of marriage. It is in marriage practices that we often commonly understand beyond the academic discourse that caste is practiced. Marriage is always in South Asian society, whether Muslim or not. Uh, Caste is something which is the first thing that we look at, or biradri, or any kind of familial associations. And marriages, of course, women are central to this idea. So which communities can marry their women into another community, which cannot? This would be a subject of inquiry that will enable us to understand the issue better. Further, more instances of practice of caste would include women. One such instance is, for instance, around food practices. So I know that there are scholars now trying to work on uh, different food practices of Muslim societies. This could include narratives from women. This could include uh, uh, different ways in which we talk about Muslim caste. Uh, Currently, of course, again, uh, the issue of social reform associated with not just pasmanda or occupational castes among Muslims, but in general in Muslim society in India, addresses women without often acknowledging it. But the whole discourse on UCC, or Uniform Civil Code, is something where uh, women should be at the center of the debate. This again is something that will come up perhaps in the days to come, but will also be hotly debated, and again through various perspectives, whether there is a different approach that occupational castes or pasmanda Muslims would have on the UCC. Of course, these discourses should include voices of women who will be most affected by such social reforms. So I hope this is something, at least in scholarship, I think this idea is missing, and I hope that more scholars engage with it in the coming days.
Thank you, Suhaib. You explain it very nicely. Thank you. So, moving to the last question, as you advocate for the study of Muslim caste association, what do you believe should be the role of policymakers and civil society in addressing the issue of social inequality and representation within these communities?
Okay, so I mean, I'm not the best person to advise policymakers, but I think there is already enough discourse uh, in the public domain around this, and how some of these issues can be represented better. One immediate thing that comes to mind is, of course, the issue of caste census in India. It's not just related to Muslims, but in general, there is a demand among many lower caste groups that there should be a caste census all over India, where we know the real numbers of different castes and how much they are represented in the public institutions. This, of course, should also include Muslim castes. This is something that is uh, uh, that is being written about in the media these days, and policymakers should be well advised about it. Uh, there are people, in addition to the caste census, which is a far more general demand, is a more specific demand related to Muslim castes, which is to include them in the SC category. The SC category, or the scheduled caste category, currently does not include Muslim lower caste groups, as various things around it, the denial of Muslims as untouchable groups, or people quoting from the Constituent Assembly regarding this debate. In this, of course, again, Imtiaz Ahmad has an important article which was written several years ago, but now there is a renewed debate around this in the Supreme Court of India. There are petitioners like Shireen Azam, there are others like Khalid Anis Ansari who have written on these discourses, who are better aware than I am, where they demand that Muslim castes, certain groups, should be included in the SC category so that they are able to get reservations and other benefits that may better represent them in public institutions, but not just in public institutions, but also in higher educational institutions, uh, and eventually then in the public discourse and also politics. For me personally, I think one of the reasons, now coming back to your first question and how we started this conversation, I think higher educational institutions or the universities in India, there, what I see, at least in terms of the scholarship, where these ideas have come into uh, public discourse, was enabled precisely by the changes after the Mandal Commission, but also with OBC reservations in higher educations, where we had a lot of Muslims who were not part of higher educational institutions before who were able to, at least when I was studying in the university in the 2000s and the 2010s, were able to come into educational institutions, question a lot of narratives that were assumed, questioned a lot of ideas about Muslim society, and began to rethink uh, uh, several ideas, but also bring their own social experience to the university, to curriculums, to syllabi, to ways of looking at Muslim history. And it is often these voices and these students who could bring change in the way we think. So I think it's very crucial that groups who were historically marginalized, groups from Muslim occupational classes, from those who are understood as Pasmanda Muslims, are uh, given more space in the public discourse, in the public domain, and that is where we hope that through these voices and narratives, we can have a different understanding, a far more enriching understanding of Muslim society in India, but also in South Asia in general.
Yeah, very enlightening view. Again, we are deeply grateful for your participation and for sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you all for joining us today for this enlightening discussion on Muslim politics beyond minority representation, understanding caste among Muslim communities in India. A special thank to our speaker, Soheb Niazi, for sharing his valuable insights. We hope this conversation has provided you with a deeper understanding of this complex issue. Stay tuned for further more events from South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. Until next time, goodbye. Have a great day, Shoaib. Thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you, Zehra. Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.